You're listening to This Week in E-Commerce, the Ecom Nation podcast. Dive into the top online retail headlines with your hosts, Paul Waddy and Mel Chia. Let's load up the cart. This Week in E-Commerce, episode 54. I am Mel Chia, flying solo this week as Paul is unavailable. As usual, I will be going through all the week's biggest headlines, of which there have been many, because there has been an absolutely bumper week of headlines from the good to the bad to the AI and even more. And we're going to be covering off as well some of the trends which are driving consumer behavior in Australia in the cost of living crisis. But before we do that, it would be remiss of me not to make mention of the crazy weather we've been experiencing around the country. In particular, in South Australia, we have seen some days of up to 40 degrees in parts of the state, which is just wild in August. And in New South Wales, Sydney has experienced the hottest August on record. And nationwide, on average, we are 8 degrees hotter than any other August. While it's really lovely to be experiencing some of that summertime weather at the end of winter, it is a reminder of the looming threat of global warming and what it is going to do to our weather and our cities. If you're interested in finding out more about that, there is a great interview which I did with Alice Cooper, the head of sustainability at the Winning Group, aka Appliances Online, about this very topic. You can find that on the Nora podcast. So please go give that a listen if that's something you do want to listen to. But before you do that, make sure you listen to the rest of this episode because we've got a lot to cover off. The first cab off the rank, as it were, is about Mosaic. So Mosaic Brands, who we spoke about a few weeks ago, owners of brands like Katie's and Miller's, recently were in a bit of trouble. They were considering applying for safe harbor provisions, which would essentially insulate the directors from any penalties because they came forward early with some issues which they were having. And it appears that they are going to be placed in a compulsory trading suspension, which started as of this week due to not lodging their annual financial report. Now, they do have a bit of time to lodge that. They have until September 30th to lodge that, but they have announced that they will be releasing their FY24 results in August 28th. But they do need that time to resolve a number of concerns before finalising those results. Now, well, they are saying that there's just a lot of work which needs to go on in the background to work with all the relevant stakeholders to put together what the strategy is to ensure that when they do release those financial results, they can give the market some confidence. I got to say, things aren't looking good because when you start doing things like this, it sends a signal to market that you don't have your shit together and things are potentially worse than what is even thought. So there is some behind the scenes going on with their major lender, I believe, in trying to renegotiate some of the payment terms of the loans they have from them, and in terms of finding a way out of the current issues which are plaguing their trade. Now, we talked about this before, where one of the issues is that they did invest a lot into fulfillment. So fulfillment takes a lot of capital to invest into, but doesn't really drive a whole lot of additional revenue. So that's one thing where a lot of money was parked somewhere, which took away a lot of the operating capital to be able to service those loans, to be able to invest in that additional infrastructure, to be able to offer better online fulfillment. However, they were late to the party with online retail, which has meant that while they're playing catch up, it's also been compounded by the fact that there's now a cost of living crisis and they've made a big investment into something which hasn't eventuated as of yet. Now, not to say that it won't, but I think, as I said a couple of weeks ago, that one of the biggest challenges which Mosaic Brands faces is that they lack any differentiation. If you look at all their brands are essentially cannibalizing each other. They're all targeting that middle income, middle-aged woman and who are shopping from the exact same stores, rather than actually targeting different customers and creating different points of difference. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those results are going to be. They have a bit of time. So obviously they missed their August 28th deadline for the results, but hopefully they'll be able to lodge their financial report and update the market by September 30th. So they've got a few more weeks to do this, but hopefully we see something in the next few weeks. All right, moving on to another brand which definitely didn't do so well was Dion Lee. So Dion Lee, a few months ago actually now, back in May, they went into voluntary administration after they failed to find a buyer, and also after they failed to they lost confidence from their major backer, which is Q. So after going through the administration process, they were found that they were unable to reach a deal with any potential buyers, as their liquidators have said. So there were no acceptable offers. So essentially, what happened last week, where Booktopia were sold to a buyer who saw some potential in there. In this case, there was no potential buyer who was willing to buy the Dion Lee business, which just underscores how tough it is right now for fashion at the moment, particularly a brand like Dion Lee, which also has a lot of infrastructure as well, and a relatively, and quite a few retail stores around Australia, that there was no one who was willing to come in there and take over that business. So they will continue operating until September, October, while online they will cease trading in November. So it's a sad day. Dion Lee, founded in 2009, sold in 160 outlets globally, was a fashion brand which was very well known throughout Australia, particularly in the that late 2000s sort of period into the 2010s. So it's a sad day to see them go under. But again, with how competitive women's fashion is, it's no wonder that this has happened, and that particularly since there's no buyer as well. Seeing that in this business, it's harder, I think, for the market to see that they can cut out their own niche in the space. Whereas Booktopia, already an established player in the book space, which I guess their buyer felt that there was more opportunity there for Booktopia. All right, that's a couple of the quick ones. We are now going to get into some meatier topics. And the first one I'm going to cover off is a report which came out last week, which looked at the top 3 trends which are driving Australian spending habits during the high cost of living. Now, this was conducted by the Sydney-based research firm Ophir Asset Management. And the first one they've talked about is car yards, where in particular, if you remember during COVID period, for some reason, we all decided to go out and buy cars, and a lot of cars. And with car manufacturers essentially shutting down or having to slow production, car production slowed down, car demand grew massively, which meant that in many cases you could find a second-hand car for more than a new car, since that new cars were scarce, and sometimes you were waiting 3 to 6 months, if not longer, for delivery. I know I ordered a car towards the end of COVID. That took me almost 6 months to receive. But in the meantime, though, that has now completely flipped. With the global cost of living crisis, and consumers generally doing it tougher and being a bit more stretched, they're placing fewer orders for new cars. But in the meantime, though, global vehicle manufacturing has completely rebounded. So you can see that with all the manufacturers, it's not an issue now to get cars made. Cars are now flying off the production line faster than they have been in the last few years. But when you see that slowing demand, you can see how that creates a problem. So while consumers are spending less, they're now willing to go back to secondhand car yards and buy from them. And the secondhand car dealers, because they no longer, because scarcity isn't really an issue anymore, we now have an overabundance of supply, they're not able to charge a premium. So secondhand car yards are now doing great business, selling cars at relatively good prices, definitely cheaper than new cars, unlike what was happening during COVID. But what's happening is that new car dealers are struggling to sell those cars and having to offer steeper and steeper discounts. And you would have seen this already with Tesla, who have cut their prices now twice in the last 12 months, which has really which has really caused a lot of angst for Tesla owners who have seen that their brand new vehicle, which they've only bought a short time ago, is actually now worth less than a secondhand vehicle. So that creates a major issue in terms of our equity, because we're buying an asset which is already valued lower than the price we bought it for. And you can see how this is going to offer further and further issues, particularly as people are unable to service their debts from struggling customers. All right, the next one we're going to talk about is coffee shops. But more in particular, we're going to be talking about home appliances, because Breville, who make coffee makers, toasters, microwaves, have seen a record year of sales. And this is in spite of consumer spending. So they are attributing this to the fact that a lot of people are looking to trade in their habits. And what I mean by trading in is that instead of giving up coffee, for instance, they're looking to give up the coffee they buy from the coffee shop and trade that in for a coffee machine at home. But they're also willing to invest in a more expensive one as well. So while Breville does have a range going from one which is a couple of $100 all the way up to $3,700 for a coffee machine, they're seeing demand across the board increase because people still want to have good coffee, and some people are willing to pay that $3,700 premium, but they're justifying it by the fact that they're now spending less when they go out. And you can see this by hospitality doing it particularly tough right now, with a lot of famed restaurants around Australia shutting down over the last few months. And we're seeing them start to increase as well as people start trading and going out for dining at home. So Breville are seeing that growth in a lot of other categories as well, not just in coffee, with more and more people now looking to invest in their home, to invest in the things at home which are going to make them, which are going to allow them to justify not going out because they can make something really lovely at home. And you can see that as well with a lot of brands in the cookware space, who, as people shift more towards home cooking, are now investing more and more into their home cooking appliances, whether they be an air fryer or a really nice frying pan or just really nice knives. And people are now willing to spend more on those categories because they're eating out less. They're going to be spending less money out. So they still want to think that they are doing something good. They are still doing something to treat themselves. Because when you go out, that's what it is. It's a treat. So since you're giving up that treat, you still want to be able to carve out some sort of treat for yourself at home. So you can see that spending is still there. And this is reinforced by the fact that Temple & Webster, when we talked about them a couple of weeks ago, when they released their earnings report, they saw quite significant growth and hovering just under $500 million of annual revenue in the last financial year, but also a 20%, almost a 30% increase in new customers, and active customers, I should say, showing that people are still willing to spend on those things at home, are still willing to spend on home furnishings, decorations for the home, a new couch, because they're spending more time there. Similar to what we saw during COVID, where people were just changing their spending habits. But then after that's when COVID finished and then we were allowed out again, we started spending more money out. This is almost a retraction back to that. We're almost regressing back to that COVID time where we're now investing in our homes and making sure that we can give ourselves those little luxuries at home since we're going out a little bit less now. And the third trend identified in this report is home renos. So while people are still buying and selling houses and moving, a lot of it is saying that people are purchasing things for the home. They're still remodeling. They're still doing more and more things at home, despite the cost of living crisis and despite elevated interest rates. And again, they're doing this because they're going out less. They're looking to cut corners elsewhere. So they've already cut corners in terms of the clothes they're buying, the amount of times they're going out for meals, the amount of times they're entertaining. So they still want to spend that money, but they spend that money elsewhere. They're spending that money at home. So while we just talked about Breville and Temple & Webster selling a lot of appliances, furniture, home renos is another booming area where people are looking to spend more on making the home prettier, installing new appliances. So if you're thinking about getting into e-commerce now, or you happen to be in one of those spaces, really think about how you can pivot your marketing, your messaging, to be focusing more on those areas, to really target people at that pain point. If you can see some of Temple & Webster's advertising during the Olympics, a lot of that was very much focused on making your home your castle, on investing into that nicer bed, investing into that nicer couch at home. So you wouldn't have to pretend that you're going out because you're sitting on something really lovely and comfortable at home. So really start thinking about how you can pivot your messaging to be more applicable to what the consumer psyche is now. That it's not that they don't want to spend. They just don't want to spend outside the house. They're still happy to spend inside the house. All right, our next story is about the Accent Group. So the Accent Group, owners of a number of footwear brands, including the Athlete's Foot, Hoka, Cat, and many, many others, have seen the net profit this year plunge by 33%, which is a gigantic number. Normally I throw this to Paul to get his feedback and his reaction on, but that is an absolutely huge number to see your profit drop down on, because like many other brands, they actually saw an increase in their sales by 2.7% to 1.61 billion, but saw a 33% drop in net profit to 59.5 billion. So what's happening here is that, like many brands, they're seeing the fact that they need to aggressively discount to remain relevant in the market, or they're having to market harder than ever before in order to get that sale. And this is not new. This is something which we've seen more and more, and is affecting every single brand. But this is a particularly big one because they are one of the dominant, if not the dominant brand in the footwear market. Other brands like Hype DC, Platypus are a bit of a barometer for streetwear as well, in terms of what people are going to spend their money on. Because if people aren't buying new sneakers, if streetwear fans and sneakerheads aren't buying new sneakers, things must be really tough. And we're seeing a brand like this have to discount so heavily. It's a clear signal that even the most diehards are not buying as much as they used to. And you see this with brands like Nike and Jordan, who we've talked about before, where Jordan brand you would never ever see on sale. But go to JD Sports now, and there's plenty of Jordans on sale. Go to Foot Locker, plenty of Nikes on sale. These are brands which have historically not had to go on sale, but now need to go on sale because people aren't buying them anymore, or buying much fewer of them, or being more discerning in how many they buy. But in addition to this as well, the Accent Group are now looking at divesting some of their other brands too. So they have sold the Tribe, which I believe was a children's footwear brand. They've sold that and are also not continuing with their Caterpillar distribution agreement beyond the end of this year. So again, trying to reduce their cost from brands which they are uncompetitive in, or which they're unable to achieve a high enough margin in order to bolster their net profit. So arguably potentially seeing a loss in some of those markets. So having said that, though, they are still planning on opening 50 new stores in the next financial year, in the current fiscal year, I should say. And so far, in the first 7 weeks of this financial year, they've seen total sales grow from 8.7%. So they're already starting to see improvement there in this financial year, potentially due to some of those smarter decisions they've had to make. Now, the Accent Group is a very, very well-run company, so no doubt they will find their way out of this. The Athlete's Foot is a very large and one of the most prominent specialty retailers in their space, but also conscious that there is a lot of competition now in their space as well. And as there is more competition, they're going to need to fight even harder, to maintain their market share. So really interesting to see what they are going to do, if they're going to be able to retain their space in the market and continue to grow as well. And what this divesting of these two brands, the Tribe and Cat, will do to their bottom line. So we can look forward to the next quarter's earnings, where we can then see how they're performing in there. All right, and our final story of the day is not so much a story as a prediction. Now, it's not my prediction, but it's a prediction from an AI expert. So the AI expert, Jathan Sadowski, who posted earlier this year, I should say, but I only came across this article fairly recently, is that by 2026, AI will start to become stupid. Now, what he's saying is that it's going to be an AI model collapse. And what they're saying is that the way which a lot of the generative AI, which we use every day, whether they be ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, it's all based on learning from lots and lots of data. There's a lot of training which goes into AI, which scans a lot of data, consumes that data, and synthesizes that data to understand how we think and be able to provide those really rich, detailed responses based on all the knowledge which it has consumed. Now, when AI started training, all that data, all that knowledge was, for the most part, human created. It was created by people like you or I. So it was relatively high quality data because we were going out there researching it, using our own creative nous, our own creativity to come up with that data, which then went on to train AI. But with the speed which AI is able to create more and more content, the amount of content we're now seeing online is increasingly becoming more and more AI created. So these generative AI models are trained on data which used to be created all by human beings, but is increasingly now being trained on data created by AI. Because that data can be created much faster and cheaper than human-made data. So as the quality of that data starts to reduce, The hypothesis which Jathan has is that AI model will actually get dumber and dumber as it learns from more and more AI-created data. And the quote here is that it's like a digital version of inbreeding. And the prediction is that by 2026, the majority of the data on the internet is going to be AI generated, meaning that there will be no more human created data out there to continue to train those AI models, which means that the content which we start producing, how great those generative AI models are as being thought partners for us to help us create, ideate, analyze data, it's going to get dumber. And it's going to get progressively dumber because it's going to have fewer and fewer human-created, really, genuinely, truly creative content in which it can be trained on. And you can see already that OpenAI has recognized this issue because they are going out there and they are signing up deals with the likes of Shutterstock, Associated Press, News Corp, in order to be able to maximize and grow the funnel of human-created data which is going to them. Now, matter of fact, the New York Times actually sued OpenAI for using their content without their permission. That is a good move for the New York Times part because it's obviously their content and they should be properly remunerated for that content because it's their IP. They've created those articles, that content, which is fantastic. I should add, I'm a New York Times subscriber. They're using that and they should be compensated for it. But at the same time, if you have the likes of News Corp who are offering up their content, we also need to make sure that the content which is being licensed by these AI models is fair and balanced. So it does get a rich perspective. For instance, the last thing I would want is find out that my AI model has only been trained on far right-wing news sources and commentators. To me, that would be an absolute nightmare. But you do want that balance. You do want to make sure that we are training these AIs with as much data, but as much balanced data as possible to make sure it's taking on board as many different perspectives and able to synthesize all of that. But also making sure that we can continue to train it with more and more real human-created data as well. So it is concerning. And I talked about this about a couple of years ago now, when we talked about AI creating more and more content out there. And so much ad creative now can be done via AI, whether you're talking about switching out a background or generating a new product. Even Shopify's feature of being able to create an AI model, an AR model of a product just by uploading a few different images. Yes, it's good, but it's also scary because you think that, well, what nuances is that missing? Now, I was playing around with a new AI tool the other day, which allowed you to take a dress or any garment, put it onto a model and simulate how it would look. And it looked pretty good. But the concern with that is it's not real. It's not legitimate. And then when you can imagine that more and more of these pictures start populating the internet, suddenly the expectation of everything which is out there is going to be this slightly AI-driven version of everything which we do. The work which we produce, the content calendars we create, the product descriptions we create using AI are all going to get worse and worse if we don't continue to feed it with our own human intellect and our own human intuition. So my ask of all of you listening today is to make sure that we never stop creating content. That while we continue to use AI to help us get 70% of the way there, let's make sure that we use our own knowledge and our own intuition to get ourselves the rest of the way, the extra 30%. Because if we do seed everything to the machines, that's all that's going to be until the machines start getting dumber and dumber and dumber. And where is that going to leave us? So let's make sure that we never let it get to that and continue to feed as much human-generated content into the machine as possible so that we can all continue to evolve and live in peace and harmony with our eventual robot AI overlords. All right, that's all we've got time for this week on This Week in E-Commerce. Next week, we'll be back with Paul Waddy, hopefully, fingers crossed. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.